Advanced Financial Modeling, Topic 22, Cost of Capital, Section 3, Estimating the Cost of Debt. In calculating WACC, we've just talked about how to calculate the cost of equity. Now let's talk about how to get KD, the cost of debt. There are several approaches for calculating cost of debt. You can use the average yield on existing bonds or loans in the firm. Use the average long-term bond yield for firms with similar risk. Use the historical interest expense divided by the debt to come up with an interest or cost of debt, or use the marginal debt financing cost. So let's talk about the first method. I went to Morningstar, looked up Walmart, and asked for a picture of its debt. And what I got here is a bunch of their bonds, some longer term bonds, had the yield maturity of those bonds. And if I took those yield maturities and took about the simple average of them, it's about a 3.76% return or yield to maturity for Walmart's bonds. So I could use that. Also notice that Walmart was a AA rating. So the second method is just use that rating. It's kind of like using an industry beta versus using a stock beta. Well, this is telling me what the actual yield on their bonds is. This is telling me that if Walmart is a AA rated firm, the average yield on long-term bonds for a AA rated firm is 3.87. So I could use 3.87, and hopefully the credit rating captures kind of the risk of and cost of debt for a firm. And the advantage of this is kind of like the industry beta advantage. Maybe there's something going on with these bonds. You know, it doesn't say here, but maybe these are callable, that there's some special provision in those bonds. A third method is simply just look at, say, last year's interest expense and divide it by the ending debt balance or the average debt balance. Now, this is generally not the preferred method. One is because what if a firm is financing a lot of its debt very short term? So it might have a very low interest expense, but as rates rise, those interest expenses will go up. Also, it doesn't account for debt retirements on year-end balance sheets. So what if they retired a bunch of debt on say December 30th, but the year-end financial statements have it as zero. So when you calculate the average debt balance, you're not going to be right. And also, just if you look at the interest expense on the income statement, sometimes it doesn't net out the interest income. So you have to be really careful. Am I looking at simply the interest expense divided by debt, or is that net interest income or net interest expense, which is interest expense minus interest income on their cash? So that historical expense, although it's going to be the easiest one to calculate for all these firms, because you just have to look at the balance sheet income statement, that's going to be our last resort. The last way is just use the marginal financing for a firm. So you just know that the firm has a current line of credit at, say, 3 or 4%, or the last bond they issued, say the last long-term bond they issued had, say, 3 or 4%, or the current bank loan that were just approved for was 3.3 or 4%. So you could just use, say, the marginal financing. However, I'm just going to use the 3.87, which is that AA rated 20-year credit rate, our average rate on bonds. So let's go ahead and next topic, we're going to calculate the WACC.